I was standing on my own front porch in the pouring rain at 11:30 at night, my key turning uselessly in a lock that had been changed without my knowledge, my phone dead because I had forgotten to charge it that morning, and through the window I could see my stepson Daniel sitting on my couch that I had paid for with money I earned before his father even existed in my life, eating pizza and laughing with his girlfriend while I stood there soaked to the bone and shivering. 51 years old, and I was locked out of the house I had owned outright for 15 years before I ever married his father. The house my grandmother left me, the house where I had raised my own daughter as a single mother, working 2 jobs and every holiday to keep the mortgage paid, and this 24-year-old man who had contributed exactly nothing to my life except chaos and entitlement had changed my locks and was treating my home like it was his personal kingdom. But what Daniel didn't know, what he couldn't possibly understand because he had never worked for anything in his entire spoiled life, was that I had been documenting every single thing he had done for the past 8 months. Every threat, every incident, every moment of disrespect, every illegal action. And what I did next didn't just get me back into my house. It destroyed his entire future, eliminated him completely from the inheritance he was so certain belonged to him, and taught him a lesson about consequences that will follow him for the rest of his life. And I enjoyed every single second of watching his arrogant face crumble when he realized what I had done. Before I tell you exactly how I made him pay for this and every other thing he put me through, if you love stories of women who refuse to be bullied in their own homes, who stand up to entitled stepchildren who think respect is optional, subscribe right now and turn on all notifications. Because what I did next will show you that being kind doesn't mean being weak, and that a mature woman who has spent decades navigating difficult people is far more dangerous than some boy who thinks intimidation is power. This channel is dedicated to stories of women over 45 who stopped accepting disrespect and started demanding the dignity they deserve. And trust me, you will want to see what happens next in my story, and in the dozens of other revenge stories I share here every single week. Hit subscribe and the notification bell right now, because what comes next is just the beginning. Let me take you back to how this nightmare started, because you need to understand who I was before Daniel and his father entered my life like a wrecking ball disguised as a blessing. I was 46 years old when I met Richard at a charity fundraiser for the local children's hospital. I had spent the previous 23 years raising my daughter Emma completely alone after her father walked out when she was 6 months old, and I never heard from him again. I worked as a dental hygienist during the day and did medical billing from home at night, every single night for years, sitting at my kitchen table until 2 or 3 in the morning processing insurance claims while Emma slept upstairs, because I needed the extra income to give her everything she deserved. Dance classes, summer camps, college funds, the good school district, braces, a reliable car when she turned 16. I gave her everything, and I did it without help, without child support, without family money, just my own 2 hands and a will that refused to break no matter how tired I was. By the time Emma left for college on a full academic scholarship that she earned herself because she inherited my work ethic and determination, I had finally paid off my mortgage, finally had some savings, finally had time to breathe and think about what I wanted from life instead of just surviving day to day. My house was peaceful, organized exactly the way I liked it, decorated with things I had chosen carefully over years, plants I tended every morning, a garden I had built with my own hands in the backyard. I would wake up at 6, make my coffee in the French press I had bought myself as a 50th birthday gift, sit on my back porch watching the sunrise over the tomato plants and herb garden I had cultivated, and feel something I hadn't felt in decades, which was peace, complete peace. My life was mine, small, quiet, carefully built, completely mine. Richard seemed like a gift when I met him. 61 years old, recently widowed, a retired architect who had sold his firm and was living comfortably on investments and his pension. He was kind in the early days, attentive in ways I wasn't used to, interested in my stories about work and Emma and my little routines. He brought me flowers, real flowers, not gas station bouquets, and he actually listened when I talked. Or at least I thought he did. He told me his son Daniel was living in Colorado working in tech, independent and successful, barely ever visited, probably wouldn't be an issue. He told me his late wife had left him everything, and he was financially secure, that he wasn't looking for someone to take care of him. He just wanted companionship and someone to travel with now that he had time. It sounded perfect. It sounded like exactly what I had earned after decades of doing everything alone. Someone to share meals with, someone to talk to in the evenings, someone to split the cost of trips I had always wanted to take but couldn't afford or justify alone. We dated for 8 months, and I was careful. I was cautious. I didn't rush. But he was persistent in the gentlest way, and eventually I thought, why not? I deserve this. I deserve companionship. I deserve to not be alone anymore. We got married at the courthouse with Emma and 2 friends as witnesses. No big ceremony, just simple and easy. And for the first 6 months, it was good. He moved into my house because his apartment lease was ending and my house was paid off and larger, and I thought we had agreed it made financial sense. He contributed to groceries and utilities. He was pleasant enough to live with. He didn't try to change everything immediately. I thought I had been smart. I thought I had chosen well. Then Daniel lost his job in Colorado, or quit, or was fired. The story changed depending on which day Richard told it. And suddenly Daniel needed a place to stay, just temporarily, just until he got back on his feet, maybe 2 or 3 months maximum. He showed up with 2 suitcases and a backpack, and an attitude that set my teeth on edge from the very first moment. 24 years old, tall and broad-shouldered like his father, but with none of Richard's careful politeness, just this immediate presumption that my home was now his home, and I was someone he could ignore. He didn't say thank you when I showed him to the guest room. He didn't offer to help with groceries or cooking or any household tasks. He would sleep until noon or 1 in the afternoon, leave his dishes everywhere, use my expensive shampoo and face products without asking, eat food I had specifically bought for my meal prep for the week, and when I would gently, so gently, mention that maybe he could clean up after himself or contribute to groceries since he was eating about $80 worth of food per week, he would look at me like I was something disgusting. He had stepped in and say things like, "This is my dad's house. Now too," or "I'm going through a hard time," or "You're not my mother, so stop acting like it." And Richard would just say, "He's having a tough time. Give him space. He'll find a job soon and move out." But weeks turned into months, and Daniel wasn't looking for jobs. He was playing video games 16 hours a day, sleeping, eating everything in my refrigerator, leaving the bathroom disgusting, having his girlfriend over at all hours, and treating me like I was an inconvenient obstacle in his path. The disrespect escalated so gradually that I didn't see the pattern until it was everywhere. He started walking into rooms I was in and turning the television to what he wanted to watch without asking what I was watching. He started having loud phone conversations at midnight and 1 in the morning when I had to work the next day. And when I asked him to please keep it down, he would laugh and say, "It's not even that late. Relax." He would use my car without asking, bring it back with the gas tank empty and trash all over the interior. And when I told him he needed to ask permission before taking my vehicle, he said his dad told him it was fine. And Richard would just shrug and say, "We're family now. What's the big deal?" He started having friends over, people I had never met, strangers in my living room drinking my alcohol and leaving cigarette butts in my garden that I had spent years cultivating. When I said this was unacceptable, Daniel looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You need to chill out. It's not your house anymore. It's our house now. You married my dad, so you need to get used to sharing." That was the first time I felt genuine fear, not of physical violence, but of losing control of my own life in my own home. And Richard, when I went to him desperately needing him to set boundaries with his son, just said, "He's young. He doesn't mean anything by it. You're being too sensitive." My wife never had a problem with Daniel visiting, and I realized with creeping horror that I had made a terrible mistake, that Richard hadn't wanted a partner. He had wanted a free place to live and someone to subsidize his son's extended adolescence, that I had been played. 8 months after Daniel moved in, supposedly temporarily, I came home from work on a Wednesday evening to find that my home office, the room where I did my medical billing work every single night, had been completely taken over. Daniel had moved all my equipment, my files, my carefully organized system, into the corner of the dining room and had set up his gaming computer and streaming equipment in my office because, as he informed me with that same contemptuous look, he needed the space for his new streaming career, and the dining room was better for my boring paperwork anyway. I stood there looking at my desk shoved against the dining room wall, my files in boxes on the floor, my system completely disrupted, and something cracked inside me. I told him to move everything back immediately. He laughed, actually laughed in my face, and said, I already set everything up, I'm not moving it. Talk to my dad if you have a problem. And I did. I told Richard that this was completely unacceptable, that Daniel had no right to take over my workspace, that I needed my office for the work that paid for the house Daniel was living in for free. And Richard, my husband who had promised to be my partner, looked at me with this exhausted expression and said, Why do you always have to make everything into a confrontation? It's just a room. You can work anywhere. Why can't you just be flexible and make this easier for everyone? That was the moment I understood that I was alone in this, that Richard was never going to protect me or defend me or choose me over his son, that I had somehow become the villain in my own house for having boundaries. The situation continued deteriorating in ways that felt designed to break me. Daniel started bringing his girlfriend Amber over, and they would stay in his room, my guest room, for days at a time, and I could hear them through the walls at all hours. Amber treated me with the same contempt Daniel did, walking past me like I was invisible, using my bathroom products, my makeup, even my clothes without asking. Once I came home to find her wearing my favorite cardigan, the cashmere one Emma had given me for Christmas, and when I asked her to please take it off, she rolled her eyes and said, It's not that serious. And Daniel said, You have like 10 cardigans, stop being materialistic. I started keeping my bedroom door locked. I started hiding my good food in my bedroom. I started feeling like a stranger in the home I had worked for decades to own. I would lie in bed at night, listening to them laughing and talking loudly, music playing, doors slamming, and I would think about my peaceful mornings before Richard, my quiet evenings, my organized spaces, and I would cry silently into my pillow because I didn't know how to fix this without blowing up my marriage, and some part of me still believed that would make me the failure, me the problem, me the one who couldn't make it work. Then Richard had a heart attack. Moderate, survivable, but serious enough that he spent 5 days in the hospital and came home with restrictions and medications and orders to reduce stress. And Daniel, instead of stepping up or helping or showing any concern for his father, used it as an opportunity to take even more control. While Richard was in the hospital, Daniel told me that his dad had been talking about updating his will, making sure Daniel was taken care of, making sure the house would stay in the family. And wouldn't it be terrible if all the stress I was causing made his father sicker? It was a threat wrapped in false concern, and we both knew it. When Richard came home, weak and tired and needing care, I provided all of it. I took time off work. I managed all his medications. I cooked heart-healthy meals. I drove him to every follow-up appointment. I rearranged my entire life to make sure he recovered properly. And Daniel did nothing. Worse than nothing. He complained that the house was too quiet because I had asked him to please keep the noise down while his father recovered. He complained that there was no good food because I was cooking for Richard's dietary restrictions. He acted like his father's heart attack was an inconvenience to his lifestyle. And Richard, still weak and not wanting conflict, would just say, "Thank you for everything you're doing," and then turn around and tell me to please try to get along better with Daniel. Family is everything. I need you two to find a way to coexist peacefully. The irony of him asking me to be the one to bend, me who was doing everything, was not lost on me. 3 months after Richard's heart attack, on a cold November evening, I came home from a dental conference that had run late, exhausted and looking forward to a quiet night, and my key wouldn't turn in the front door lock. I stood there in the dark, confused, trying my key again and again, and finally I knocked. Daniel opened the door with this smug smile I will never forget and said, "Oh yeah, I changed the locks today. Dad said it was fine because we had some package theft in the neighborhood and needed better security. I forgot to mention it. Here's your new key." And he handed me a key, just like that. He had changed the locks on my house, the house I owned, that was in my name only, and acted like he was doing me a favor. I looked past him and saw Richard on the couch, and Richard just nodded and said, "Yeah, Daniel told me about the security issue. Seemed like a good idea." I stood there holding this new key to my own house, and I realized they had coordinated this. They had made a decision about my property without me. And when I said, "This house is in my name, you can't change locks without discussing it with me first," Daniel laughed and said, "You're married to my dad now, it's community property or whatever. You don't get to make all the decisions anymore." And that was when I knew. I knew that they were planning something. I knew that Daniel thought he had some claim to my house. I knew that Richard had probably been telling him things, making promises, setting expectations that I had never agreed to, and I knew that I was in serious danger of losing everything I had built. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Richard, listening to him snore peacefully while my mind raced, and I started thinking strategically for the first time in months instead of just emotionally. I started asking myself hard questions. What exactly had Richard told Daniel about inheritance and assets? What legal rights did Richard actually have to my house that I had owned before marriage? What protections did I have? What evidence did I have of Daniel's behavior? What would happen to my property if Richard died before me, or if we divorced? And I realized with absolute clarity that I had been stupid, dangerously stupid. I had gotten married without a prenuptial agreement because it seemed unromantic, and because Richard had said it wasn't necessary. We were both bringing assets into the marriage. We would keep things separate, but I had never formalized that separation legally. And I didn't know what Richard's will said. I didn't know if he had updated it after we married. I didn't know if Daniel was expecting to inherit my house, my savings, my everything. And I realized that my kindness, my desire to be a good wife and make everyone comfortable, had put me in a position where I could lose everything. That realization felt like ice water in my veins, shocking and clarifying and absolutely terrifying. The next morning, while Richard was at a doctor's appointment and Daniel was still asleep at 1 p.m. as usual, I started looking through Richard's papers. I know it was an invasion of privacy, and old me would have never done it, but new me, the me who was starting to understand that I was in a battle I hadn't known I was fighting, needed information. I found his will in his desk drawer, and when I read it, my hands started shaking so hard I almost dropped the pages. He had updated it 6 weeks earlier, right after his heart attack, and it left everything he owned, including his half-interest in my house, which he didn't actually have, but had somehow convinced himself he did, to Daniel. Every single thing, with a note that said he hoped Daniel would allow me to continue living in the family home for as long as I needed. Allow me to live in my house. The house I had owned for 15 years before Richard existed in my life. The house my grandmother had left me. The house I had nearly killed myself to pay off. And there was more. There were documents showing that Richard had been talking to a lawyer about claiming marital interest in my property. There were emails between Richard and Daniel discussing how the house would be Daniel's someday, how Daniel just needed to be patient, how I was difficult, but I would come around or I could be managed. Managed, like I was an obstacle, not a person. Like my property was already theirs, and I was just temporarily in the way. I sat on the floor of Richard's office, papers spread around me, and I felt that same physical sensation I imagine people feel when they're shot, like the pain hasn't hit yet, but you know it's coming and it's going to be unbearable. Everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed for, everything I had built alone while raising my daughter, these men thought they could just take it. And they had been planning it, actively planning it, while I cooked Richard's heart-healthy meals and paid all the bills and cleaned up after his horrible son. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. But then, and I remember this so clearly, something shifted. The pain crystallized into something else, something cold and clear and powerful. I thought about my grandmother, who had survived the Depression and raised 4 kids alone after my grandfather died young, and had built a life through sheer determination, and had left me that house because she knew I would appreciate the gift of security. I thought about myself at 25, working 2 jobs with a baby, so tired I could barely see straight but refusing to give up. I thought about every sacrifice, every late night, every moment of pride when I made a mortgage payment on time or fixed something myself or achieved something I had been told was impossible for a single mother. And I thought, no, absolutely not. These men are not taking what is mine. They chose the wrong woman to underestimate. I took photos of everything with my phone, every page of the will, every email, every document. I put everything back exactly as I had found it. And then I did something I had never done in my entire life. I called in sick to work, and I went to see a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but Margaret Chen, a family law and estate attorney who had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in protecting her clients. I had met her once at that same charity fundraiser where I met Richard years ago, and she had given me her card and said if I ever needed anything, call. I had kept that card in my wallet for 5 years without knowing why. Now I knew. I sat in her office and I told her everything, showed her all the photos, explained the whole situation, and when I finished, she looked at me with these sharp, dark eyes and said, They're trying to steal your house through a combination of ignorance on your part and fraud on theirs, but we can stop this. And depending on how aggressive you want to be, we can do more than stop it. She explained that because I had owned the house before marriage and Richard had contributed nothing to the mortgage or property taxes or improvements, he had no legal claim to it despite being married. She explained that his will claiming to leave his half-interest was meaningless because he had no half-interest to leave. She explained that I could, if I chose, protect my assets right now through legal documents, and I could also, if I wanted, start divorce proceedings based on fraud and emotional abuse, or I could wait and see if things deteriorated further and document everything for a stronger case. She asked me what I wanted to do, and I realized, sitting there in her clean, bright office, that I had a choice. I could confront Richard and Daniel immediately, blow everything up, probably end my marriage in a spectacular fight, or I could be strategic. I could protect myself legally first, document their behavior more thoroughly, wait for them to make a bigger mistake, and then dismantle their plans so completely they would never see it coming. I thought about Daniel's smug face when he handed me that new key. I thought about Richard's casual dismissal of my concerns over and over again. I thought about being told I was difficult and inflexible and too sensitive when I was actually just asking for basic respect in my own home. And I chose strategy. I chose to be the chess player instead of the pawn. Margaret drew up a post-nuptial agreement that clarified that all property I brought into the marriage remained mine solely, and all property Richard brought remained his, and anything acquired during marriage would be split fairly, but my house was explicitly and completely mine. She drew up a new will for me, leaving everything to my daughter Emma. She prepared all the documents to record my house in a trust with me as the sole trustee and Emma as beneficiary, which would protect it even more thoroughly. And then she explained exactly what I needed to document, and how to document it to build an airtight case if I eventually chose to divorce, or if they escalated further. I paid her retainer with money from my private savings account that Richard didn't know about, and I left her office feeling something I hadn't felt in almost a year. I felt powerful. For the next 2 months, I played the role of the compliant wife perfectly, while I documented absolutely everything and positioned every piece exactly where I needed it. I was calm, pleasant, accommodating on the surface. I stopped arguing with Daniel about small things, which made him even more bold and arrogant because he thought he had won, thought he had broken me into submission. I let him think that. Every time he was disrespectful, I wrote down the date, time, exactly what he said, and if possible, I recorded it on my phone. Every time Richard dismissed my concerns or sided with Daniel against me, I documented it. Every time Daniel had people over without asking, used my things without permission, made a mess and refused to clean it, I took photos and videos and notes. I set up a camera in my living room that they didn't know about, told them it was a new air purifier, and it captured hours of footage of Daniel and his friends trashing my space. Daniel speaking about me with utter contempt when he thought I couldn't hear. Daniel and Amber going through my personal items and laughing about how uptight I was. I created a file folder 3 inches thick of evidence, and while I did that, I had Richard served with the post-nuptial agreement. I did it carefully, strategically. I told him that after his heart attack, I had been thinking about our future and estate planning, and I wanted to make sure we both had clarity and protection, that this was about love and making sure we were both secure. I presented it as protecting him as much as me, and he signed it, barely reading it, because his lawyer had told him it was fair and because he still thought he had time to manipulate me, still thought I was manageable. What he didn't realize was that by signing it, he had just confirmed legally that he had no claim whatsoever to my house, my savings, or anything I had brought into the marriage. His will leaving Daniel my house was now completely void and meaningless, but I didn't tell him that. I let him think everything was still going according to his plan. And a week after he signed the post-nuptial agreement, I recorded my house in the trust Margaret had prepared, which meant that even if something happened to me, even if I died tomorrow, my house would go directly to Emma through the trust and completely bypass probate and any claims Richard or Daniel might make. My house was now untouchable. They just didn't know it yet. Then came the incident that changed everything, the night I started this story with. It was a Thursday in late January, cold and pouring rain, and I had been at a mandatory evening training at work that ran until 11. I was exhausted, looking forward to getting home and going straight to bed. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed immediately that the porch light was off, which was strange because I always left it on. I walked up to the door, put my key in the lock, and it wouldn't turn. Not the new key Daniel had given me months ago, which I had been using. That key wouldn't work. I tried it again and again, and then I looked through the window and saw Daniel on my couch with Amber, eating pizza and watching my television, and I knocked on the door. He looked right at me. I saw him see me, and he turned back to the television. I knocked louder. I called his name, and finally he got up slowly, so slowly, and opened the door about 6 inches and said, "What?" I said, "My key isn't working. Did you change the locks again?" And he smiled, that same cruel smile, and said, "Yeah, I did. We needed better security, but you know what? It's late, and I have company, so maybe you should go stay at a hotel tonight and we'll sort this out tomorrow." And he started to close the door, in my face, locking me out of my own house in the pouring rain at 11:30 at night. I was so shocked that for a moment I just stood there while the door closed, and I heard him lock it, and then I heard him and Amber laughing at me. I stood there on my porch, rain soaking through my coat, my work bag getting wet, and I felt humiliation so complete it was physical. I knocked again, harder, and I called Richard's name. Daniel opened the door again and said, "My dad took a sleeping pill and he's out. He's not going to wake up. So you really need to leave before I call the cops for trespassing. Trespassing on my own property." I said, "This is my house. You cannot lock me out. Let me in right now." And he said, "I don't think so. You've been really disrespectful lately, and I think you need to learn some appreciation for the family that's letting you live here. So come back tomorrow with a better attitude." And he closed the door again. I stood there, rain pouring down, and I realized several things at once. He had planned this. He had changed the locks specifically to do this, to humiliate me, to assert dominance, to show me that he considered himself in control of my house. He had given his father a sleeping pill, or told me he did, so Richard wouldn't interfere. He was escalating to see how far he could push me, testing whether I would fight back or break down, and he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. I got back in my car, soaking wet and shaking with cold and rage, and I drove to a hotel. I checked in. I took a hot shower. I sat on the hotel bed in the robe they provided, and I called Margaret Chen's emergency line. I told her what had happened, and she said, "This is it. This is everything we need. File a police report right now for illegal lockout, document everything, and tomorrow we're going scorched earth." I filed the police report that night from the hotel. I sent Margaret all the videos and photos and documentation I had been gathering, and I barely slept, not because I was upset anymore, but because I was planning. Every detail, every move, every consequence. The next morning, I didn't go home. I went to Margaret's office, and over the next 6 hours, we executed a plan so thorough, so legally airtight, so strategically perfect that I wish I could have seen Daniel's face when each piece fell into place. First, Margaret filed for an emergency protective order based on the illegal lockout, the documentation of harassment, the threatening behavior, and the evidence I had gathered. The judge granted it immediately. The protective order required Daniel to stay at least 500 feet away from me and my property. Second, because Daniel had been living in my house without a lease and had now committed illegal lockout, which is a crime in our state, Margaret filed for immediate eviction with law enforcement escort. Third, we filed a civil lawsuit against Daniel for harassment, illegal lockout, property damage, theft of services, and emotional distress, with all my documentation as evidence. Fourth, and this was the piece I was most proud of, we sent a formal legal letter to Richard informing him that he had 24 hours to remove Daniel from my property, or he would also be named in the lawsuit, and reminding him that per the post-nuptial agreement he had signed, he had no ownership interest in my house, and no legal right to allow anyone else to live there without my express written permission. Fifth, we contacted the police and had them escort me back to my house with a locksmith to change the locks again, this time with me present and with documentation that this was my sole property. And sixth, I contacted Emma and told her everything, sent her all the documentation, and asked her if she wanted to come home for a few days to support me. She got on a plane that afternoon. I need to pause here and ask you something from my heart to yours, woman to woman. Have you ever been made to feel like a stranger in your own home, in the space you worked for and paid for and built with your own hands? Have you ever been treated like your boundaries don't matter? Like your property is somehow communal just because you were kind enough to share it? Like standing up for yourself makes you difficult or ungrateful? Have you ever bitten back words and swallowed anger and made yourself small in your own space because you were trying to keep the peace with people who never once tried to keep the peace with you? If right now you're nodding, If you're feeling that burn of recognition because you know exactly what I'm talking about, because someone in your life thinks your kindness is weakness and your home is theirs for the taking, I want you to do something powerful for yourself right now. Write in the comments, "My home is mine, and I will protect it." Just those 8 words. This isn't just a comment on a YouTube video. This is your declaration that you will not be displaced, not be made to feel unwelcome in the space you earned, not be guilted into giving up what's yours to people who contribute nothing but chaos. When you write those words, you're not just helping yourself. You're helping every other woman who is scrolling through here at midnight feeling violated in her own home, who needs to know she has the right to say no, who needs permission to stop being accommodating to people who are taking advantage. Write it now. My home is mine and I will protect it. Thank you for trusting me with that declaration. Now let me show you what happened when I finally stopped protecting people who were trying to destroy me. The police escort to my house happened at 2 p.m. on Friday, exactly 24 hours after Daniel locked me out. I arrived with 2 police officers, a locksmith, Margaret Chen, and my daughter Emma, who had flown in that morning and was so angry on my behalf she could barely speak. Daniel's car was in the driveway. Amber's car was there too. The officers knocked on the door, announced themselves, and Daniel opened it wearing pajama pants and looking confused. The senior officer handed him the protective order and the eviction notice and explained that he had 30 minutes to gather essential belongings and vacate the property immediately, and that he was not allowed to return or come within 500 feet of the property or me. I watched Daniel's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, anger, and then panic. He said, "You can't do this. My dad lives here. This is his house too," the officer said. "According to these documents, this house is solely owned by her, held in trust, and you are being evicted for illegal lockout and harassment. You need to start packing now." Daniel called for his father, and Richard came stumbling out of the bedroom looking disoriented and shocked. He saw me standing there with police and lawyers and Emma, and he said, "What is going on? What are you doing?" I looked at him, and my voice was steady and cold, and I said, "I am removing your son from my property for illegally locking me out last night and for months of documented harassment. You have a choice right now. You can help him pack and leave with him, or you can stay and we can discuss the future of our marriage. But he is leaving right now, and he's not coming back." Richard turned red, started to argue, said I was being ridiculous, said we could work this out, said I was overreacting as usual. Margaret stepped forward and handed him a document and said, "This is the post-nuptial agreement you signed affirming that this house is solely her property. This is the protective order. This is the eviction order. Your son committed a crime. She is within her legal rights. If you interfere with this eviction, you can be arrested for obstruction. Choose wisely." I will never forget the look on Richard's face when he realized I wasn't the manageable woman he thought I was, that I had been planning this, that I had outsmarted him. Daniel started yelling, calling me names I won't repeat, saying I was a vindictive witch, saying he was going to sue me, saying his father would never forgive me. I said nothing. I just stood there with my arms crossed and watched the police supervise while he threw clothes and electronics into garbage bags. Amber was crying, asking what was happening, and Daniel was screaming at her to help him pack. Richard stood there looking between me and his son, and I could see him trying to calculate, trying to figure out if there was a way to fix this or manipulate this or manage me back into submission. And I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "You have been lying to me and conspiring with your son to steal my property since before you even had your heart attack. I have documentation of everything. I have your emails. I have your updated will trying to leave Daniel my house that you have no legal claim to. I have months of recordings of your son's abuse. You can leave with him right now, or you can stay and we can try to salvage something, but it will be on my terms and your son will never live under my roof again. Choose." Richard chose his son. He started crying, actually crying, saying I was destroying his family, saying he never thought I could be so cruel, saying his late wife would have never treated Daniel this way, and something in me, the last little piece that had been hoping he would choose me, choose us, choose to be the partner he had promised to be, that piece died right there. I said, "Then pack your things and go with him. You have 1 hour." And I walked outside with Emma and Margaret and the police, and I waited. They packed. Richard was crying and Daniel was raging and Amber was confused and it was chaos and noise and drama, and I felt nothing. Just cold clarity. Just certainty that I was doing exactly the right thing. After 45 minutes, they came out with bags and boxes, loaded everything into both cars, and Daniel looked at me with pure hatred and said, "You're going to regret this. You're going to be so sorry." I said, "The only thing I regret is ever letting you into my home. Now leave before you're arrested for violating the protective order." They left. The locksmith changed all my locks while I watched. Margaret gave me copies of all the legal documents and explained that the protective order was good for 6 months and could be extended, that the civil lawsuit would proceed and I would almost certainly win based on my evidence, and that if Richard tried to contest the post-nuptial agreement or claim any interest in my house, we had everything we needed to defeat that claim, and I could file for divorce on grounds of fraud. Emma hugged me and said, "Mom, I am so proud of you. I can't believe you did all of this." And I realized that I had just taken back my entire life in one afternoon. I walked through my house, my quiet, peaceful house, and I started removing every trace of them. Richard's clothes that he hadn't packed, I boxed up and left on the porch. Daniel's gaming equipment he hadn't been able to take, I photographed for the lawsuit and then donated. Every item that reminded me of them, gone. I cleaned my office and moved all my work equipment back where it belonged. I cleaned the guest room that had been Daniel's and turned it back into the peaceful space it had been before. I threw out food they had eaten, I replaced products they had used, I washed every piece of fabric in the house, and then I sat on my back porch with a cup of tea and I watched the sunset. And for the first time in over a year, I felt like I could breathe. If you're absolutely gripped by this story and you can't wait to hear what happened next with the lawsuit and the inheritance and Richard's pathetic attempts to come back, make sure you're subscribed to this channel with all notifications turned on, because every single week I share real stories of mature women who stopped accepting disrespect and started enforcing boundaries like their lives depended on it, because sometimes they do. Women who realized that being over 45 doesn't mean being powerless or invisible. It actually means having decades of experience dealing with manipulative people, the patience to plan strategically instead of reacting emotionally, the resources and knowledge to protect yourself legally, and the wisdom to know that some people will take everything you have if you let them. This channel is your reminder that you don't have to accept being treated badly in your own home, in your own life, by anyone, family, or not. Every story I share here is about women who drew a line and enforced it, who stopped caring more about other people's comfort than their own safety, who chose themselves when everyone told them that was selfish. So subscribe right now, turn on that bell, because the women in this community don't just survive, we reclaim our power and our peace. And I promise you'll want to be here next week when I share the story of a 53-year-old woman whose adult children tried to have her declared incompetent so they could control her finances. And what she did when she found out will leave you cheering. Hit that subscribe button now. The legal consequences for Daniel unfolded beautifully over the following months. Like dominoes I had set up perfectly, and then watched fall exactly as planned. The civil lawsuit I filed against him proceeded, and he tried to defend himself at first, tried to claim that he had every right to be in his father's house, that I was a liar, that he had done nothing wrong. But I had video evidence of him admitting he changed the locks to lock me out. I had recordings of him threatening me. I had months of documented harassment. I had witnesses, including my daughter and my coworkers who had seen my distress. His lawyer, when he finally got one, took one look at the evidence and told him to settle immediately. Daniel refused because he was arrogant and stupid and thought he could charm a judge. We went to court. I sat there calmly while my lawyer presented a timeline of abuse so clear and documented that the judge actually stopped her at one point and asked Daniel's lawyer if he wanted to reconsider settling. Daniel's lawyer said yes. Daniel said no. So we continued. The judge ruled in my favor on every single count: harassment, illegal lockout, emotional distress, theft of services for the months he lived in my house without contributing anything. Daniel was ordered to pay me $68,000 in damages and legal fees. He didn't have $68,000. His wages were garnished. His credit was destroyed. And the protective order was extended for 5 years, which meant he couldn't come near me or my property until he was almost 30 years old. But the inheritance, that was the piece that destroyed him completely. The piece that made him understand that actions have consequences that last forever. Richard tried to reconcile with me 3 times in the months after I threw them out. He would send emails saying he missed me, saying Daniel had been out of line but I had overreacted, saying we could fix this if I would just be reasonable. I never responded. Then his lawyer contacted my lawyer saying Richard wanted to contest the post-nuptial agreement, claiming he had signed under duress. Margaret laughed and sent back copies of the email chain showing Richard's lawyer had reviewed it and confirmed it was fair, copies of Richard's signatures on multiple pages, and a polite letter saying that if Richard wanted to proceed with contesting it, we would be happy to countersue for fraud based on his attempt to claim ownership of property he had no legal right to, and we would include all the evidence of his conspiracy with Daniel. Richard dropped the contest immediately. And then, 6 months after I threw them out, Richard called me directly. His voice was shaking, and he said he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, that he had weeks or maybe a few months left, and he wanted to see me, wanted to make peace. Part of me felt sadness for him because death is terrible, regardless of what someone has done. But the stronger part of me, the part that remembered him dismissing my pain over and over and choosing his son's comfort over my safety, that part stayed cold. I told him I was sorry he was sick, but I had no interest in seeing him. He asked if I would reconsider, said he wanted to apologize in person. I said he could apologize over the phone if he wanted. He did. He said he was sorry for not protecting me from Daniel. Sorry for not believing me. Sorry for trying to claim my property. And then he said, I've updated my will. I'm leaving everything to Daniel because he's my son and he has nothing, and I hope you can understand. I said, I understand perfectly, and I hope the two of you are very happy together, and I hung up. Richard died 5 weeks later. I didn't go to the funeral. Emma asked if I wanted to, and I said no. I had already grieved the end of that relationship months ago when I threw them out. His death was just a formality. Daniel inherited everything Richard had, which wasn't much. Richard's savings had been depleted by medical bills. His pension died with him. He had some personal items. A car, maybe $40,000 after debts were paid. Daniel thought he was getting my house. I know this because he showed up at my property 2 days after Richard's funeral, violating the protective order, and started screaming through my door that he was the rightful owner now, that his father left him the house, that I needed to get out. I called the police while I recorded him on my phone through the window. The police arrived and arrested him for violating the protective order. He spent the weekend in jail. When he got out, his lawyer had to explain to him that Richard's will leaving him the house was meaningless because Richard never had any legal interest in my house to leave. The house had been mine before marriage. The post-nuptial agreement confirmed it stayed mine. The trust I had established meant it would go to Emma when I died, not to probate where anyone could make claims. Daniel owned exactly nothing of mine, would inherit exactly nothing of mine, had no claim to anything I had ever built or worked for. Everything he thought was coming to him, the security he had been counting on, the house he had treated as his own, all of it was gone and had actually never existed except in his entitled imagination. The last I heard, Daniel is 31 now, working a series of low-wage jobs because his garnished wages and destroyed credit mean he can't build anything stable, still paying off the judgment against him from my lawsuit, living in a rented room somewhere. Richard's $40,000 is long gone, spent on lawyers and debts and whatever else. Amber left him about a year after everything fell apart because she had been with him for the lifestyle she thought he was going to inherit, not for him. He tried to contact me once, about 3 years ago, through a mutual acquaintance, saying he wanted to apologize and make amends. I sent back a message saying I had no interest in any contact with him ever, and that if he tried to reach me again, I would pursue legal action for harassment. I haven't heard from him since, and honestly, I don't think about him anymore unless someone asks, like I'm doing now telling you this story. He's irrelevant to my life. He made choices. Those choices had consequences. I'm not responsible for protecting him from those consequences anymore. I'm busy living my life, finally, peacefully, exactly the way I want. My life now is everything I thought I might have when I married Richard, but better, because it's mine alone, and no one can take it, or taint it, or make me feel unsafe in it. I wake up when I want. I have my coffee on the back porch every single morning watching my garden grow, and nobody interrupts that peace. I did eventually start dating again, carefully, and I met someone wonderful, a retired teacher named Gloria, who has her own house and her own life and her own boundaries, and we spend time together because we want to, not because either of us needs something from the other. We travel together sometimes, to places I always wanted to see but never thought I could afford. I redecorated my house exactly the way I wanted it, colors and furniture and art that make me happy. I turned the guest room into a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a reading chair and perfect lighting. My daughter Emma lives across the country, but we talk 3 times a week, and she visits often, and she tells me all the time that what I did, standing up for myself and protecting what was mine, taught her that she never has to accept being treated badly by anyone. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with during the chaos of that terrible year. I started taking pottery classes and painting classes, and I'm not good at either one, but I enjoy them, and that's enough. I volunteer at the same children's hospital where I met Richard all those years ago. But now I know exactly what red flags to watch for, and I will never ignore my instincts again. I don't regret marrying Richard even though it turned into a nightmare, because it taught me something invaluable. It taught me that kindness without boundaries is self-destruction. That being accommodating to people who don't respect you is not virtue. It's enabling. That family is not an excuse for abuse, and blood relation is not a free pass to treat you terribly. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to remove people from your life who are poison, even if they cry and say you're cruel, even if other people judge you for it, even if it's hard and lonely at first. I learned that I am far stronger than I thought I was, that I can be strategic and patient and absolutely ruthless when protecting what's mine, that my years of experience and my intelligence and my resources are powerful weapons when I finally decide to use them. I learned that there is no age limit on taking your life back, on starting over, on refusing to accept less than you deserve. I was 51 when I threw them out, and people told me I was too old to start over, too old to be alone again, too old to blow up my marriage over my stepson's bad behavior, and I proved every single one of them wrong. So let me speak directly to you now, woman to woman, from someone who has lived this to someone who might be living it right now. If you are in a situation where someone is taking advantage of your kindness, treating your home like it's theirs, disrespecting your boundaries, making you feel like you're crazy or difficult for wanting basic respect, please hear me. You are not overreacting. You are not too sensitive. You are not causing drama by having boundaries. You are being abused, and it doesn't matter if it's family, it doesn't matter if they're not hitting you. Emotional abuse and financial abuse and having your home invaded are real abuse, and you deserve better. If you are married to someone who consistently chooses other people over you, who dismisses your pain, who tells you to be more flexible when what they really mean is be more of a doormat, that is not a partner. That is someone using you. And you deserve an actual partner, or you deserve to be peacefully alone, but you do not deserve to be used. If you have adult stepchildren or biological children who treat you like a bank or a hotel or a servant, who think your property is theirs, who speak to you with contempt, you have every right to cut them off. You do not owe anyone access to your resources or your space or your peace just because you share DNA or a marriage certificate. Family is supposed to be the people who love and support you, not the people who exploit you. Your age is not a weakness, it is your greatest strength. You have decades of wisdom that younger people simply don't have. You know how to read people because you've been reading people for 40 or 50 or 60 years. You have patience and strategic thinking that comes from navigating complex situations for decades. You have resources, whether that's money or skills or connections or knowledge, that you've accumulated over a lifetime. You have the freedom that comes from finally not caring what people who don't respect you think about you. That is power. Use it. Protect yourself. Document everything if you're in a situation like I was. Take photos, save emails, record conversations if it's legal in your state. Write down dates and times and exact words. Build your evidence. Talk to a lawyer, even just a consultation, so you understand your legal rights and protections. Know what you own, know what's in your name, know what you're entitled to. Make a plan. Don't just react emotionally in the moment, even though that's tempting. Be strategic. Protect your assets legally before you confront anyone. And then, when you're ready, when everything is in place, enforce your boundaries without guilt and without room for negotiation. You might lose people when you set boundaries. People who are benefiting from your lack of boundaries will be very angry when you suddenly have them. They will call you selfish and cold and cruel and ungrateful. Let them. Their opinion of you is not your responsibility. especially when their opinion is based on wanting continued access to exploit you. You might be lonely at first when you remove toxic people from your life. That's normal. But loneliness is temporary, and it's far better than being surrounded by people who make you feel terrible. And eventually, I promise you, you will build new relationships with people who actually value you, or you will become so content in your own peaceful company that you won't miss the chaos at all. You are not too old to start over. I did it at 51. I know women who did it at 60, at 70. Age is just a number, and starting over is just a phrase for finally living the life you deserve instead of the life other people built for themselves on top of your back. I'm not special. I'm not extraordinary. I'm not some exception. I'm just a woman who decided enough was enough. And if I can rise from being locked out of my own house in the rain by an entitled stepson and turn it into complete victory, into peace, into a life I love, so can you. The only difference between me and you right now is that I already started, but you can start today, right now, this moment. The life you deserve, the peace you've earned, the respect you're entitled to, all of it is waiting for you on the other side of the fear of disappointing people who have never worried about disappointing you. Take the first step, make the call to a lawyer, document the next incident, open a bank account they don't know about, change your will. Whatever your first step is, take it today. You deserve better than what you're accepting, and you are strong enough to claim it. If this story moved you, shook you, inspired you, or gave you ideas about your own situation and what you might be capable of doing, I need you to do 3 things right now before you click away. First, like this video. I'm serious. Hit that thumbs up right now so the algorithm shows this to more women who need to see it. Women who are being abused in their own homes right now, thinking they have no options, no power, no way out. Your like literally changes lives by making this discoverable. Second, subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications. And I mean all notifications, not just some, because next week I'm sharing the story of a 48-year-old woman whose sister and brother-in-law moved into her house temporarily and then tried to claim squatters' rights and ownership after 18 months. And what she did when she found out will leave you absolutely speechless. It involves a property law loophole, a surprise inspection, and a family reunion no one will ever forget. You won't want to miss it. And third, most important, comment below and tell me, what was the exact moment you realized you deserved better? What was the thing someone did or said that finally made you see clearly that you were being taken advantage of, disrespected, or taken for granted in your own home? Because your story matters. Your voice matters. And this community is here to remind you that you're never too old, never too late, never too far gone to completely rewrite your ending. Share your moment in the comments right now. I read every single one, and so do thousands of other women who come here looking for solidarity and strength. Do all 3 things now, and I'll see you next week with another story of a woman who refused to stay down. Thank you for trusting me with your time and your emotions today. Now go take back your power.